Awesome. Thanks, Marissa. Greetings, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm really honored to be able to share this virtual stage with the four amazing experts that we have lined up to talk about this really important and sometimes urgent feeling topic of funding and follow-on funding, getting our innovations the resources they need to progress towards the marketplace. So in just a minute, I'll turn it over to our panelists to provide a little bit broader introduction to kind of their role in their respective organizations. We have a short time together with these panelists. We're going to do our best to get as much of their expertise out to you all in this panel as possible. But please know that they are also available for follow-up engagement. So be listening. If there's a particular panelist that you want to follow up with, I would encourage you to do that as well. For our format here for this next 45 minutes, after introductions, I'll ask a prepared question or two to each of our panelists, but we would really want to reserve a bulk of the conversation here for questions from the audience to our panelists. So please, as it's going along, please use the chat here in Zoom to drop in questions. They can either be directed to a particular panelist or open to all panelists. After the prepared questions kind of section, we'll take a look through the chat and get to as many of those questions from you all as we can in the time that we have left. So with that, we'll go ahead and start with introductions. I'll turn it over to Jon first, and then we'll go over to Prabha after that. Just a quick intro to let folks kind of know your areas of expertise ahead of the more detailed information we can get to in the panel.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Jon Collins. As Marissa pointed out, I currently at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I serve as the CSO for Pinnacle Hill, which is a partnership between UNC Chapel Hill and Deerfield Healthcare Investment out of New York City. Prior to that, I spent 24 years at GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, hardcore drug development, led teams put 6 compounds in clinical development, one of which should be filed with the FDA next year. I think all in all, I have about 15 years really at the corporate investment, institutional investment, and academic translational funding triad, if you will. That's it.
Great, Prabha, and then David.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you again for the opportunity to share my personal experience with all of you. I've spent over 40 years in pharma biotech, including after I retired in 2016, now 6 years in the government and public health private partnership, plus various boards. So I was at 3 different pharma companies. The last was Bristol Myers Squibb in 1997, where I retired as a VP for a decade, and then started my first biotech. This led to me becoming a serial CEO, and almost became an addiction, and have been the CEO of 4 different biotechs until I retired at the end of 2016. For each of the companies, I have raised venture money and also partnered with major companies. In my last company, I had raised, I'd say $550 million in about 16 years. It's a sizable amount of change, as you can imagine. For each of the companies, there were different stories. And through my career, I've had a lot of success. I've had 6 approved products, which are actually sold at local pharmacies today. In my last company, we took it public, and raising public money, of course, is quite different from private money. But there also I have experience for anybody here who would like to know that later. Since my retirement in 2016, I've been very busy and working at the National Biodefense Science Board, and that actually gives you an insight of what the government is investing in, and that's also a good source of money. I also work with the WHO and in Geneva with GARD-P. These are all public-private partnerships, and partnerships there certainly help companies to validate them. Today, we'll give you some high-level ideas, where, but then, of course, as was mentioned by Jim, you can reach out to either Marissa or Sudhi. They can always reach out to me. But just remember, raising money is never easy, but pleasing investors is also never easy. So, I can show you many of my scars one of these days. So with that, I'll pass it on.
Hey, David, and then last but not least, Stephanie.
Hi, so again, Dave Winter. I'm at the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, which is under the auspices of HHS, along with NIH, CDC, FDA, etc. My background is as an immunologist. I spent about almost 20 years at the bench as a researcher at Roswell Park Cancer Institute, Johns Hopkins, Walter Reed, and National Institute on Aging, before I realized that my department chairman was still spending 80 hours a week working, and I decided, okay, I think I'm moving into program. And I've then spent the last almost 20 years mostly at NIH. I've worked program at NIAID, and I spent 10 years at the Center for Scientific Review, where many of you will hate me because, of course, I ran study sections where your grants were rejected 90% of the time because that's the statistical average. Everybody loves program officers, hates the SROs. But about 2.5 years ago, I got called to come over to BARDA, where I have been running the BARDA Accelerator Network, which is a group of 13 business accelerators across the country that work with us, partner with us to help companies and innovators develop both their product and their company, including the very fantastic First Flight accelerator right down there in the Research Park Triangle. Amazing group of people there. I now run the BARDA Blue Knight program, which is our collaboration with Johnson & Johnson. And we take advantage of JLab's incubator spaces around the world to support companies in that health security space, which is always going to be the key point when you're dealing with BARDA, is that we focus on health security threats. And that's my background.
Great, thanks.
Okay, well, good morning, actually now it's afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to our friends on the West Coast and in the Mountain Time zones. My name is Stephanie Davis. I have served as the NHLBI Small Business Program Lead for almost 3 years now. So I joined this office in December of 2020, right in the middle of lockdown, and I've had the pleasure of speaking at, I believe this is my third meeting speaking at the Catalyze annual program. So I'm very excited to be back. So I have a background in molecular pharmacology. I got my PhD at the University of South Florida in 2016. Most of my research before coming to the NIH has been in the stroke and neurovascular pharmacology area. I did my postdoc at the University of Kentucky in their departments of neurology and neuroscience from 2016 to 2019. And during that time, I had a very valuable experience that actually helped me learn more about the value of small business grants and their role in translating academic discoveries from the bench to the bedside. So I had the very valuable experience to be able to serve as a part-time intern in the University of Kentucky Office of Technology Commercialization during the last 6 months of my postdoc. So me and several other early career scientists, most of us in graduate school or postdoctoral roles, had the opportunity to work very closely with UK faculty and staff who were trying to obtain IP protection for their technologies, license their technologies out, and sometimes even apply for small business grants through their startup companies. So during the time that I was in this internship, I was simultaneously applying to the NIH for the 2019 AAAS Science Technology Policy Fellows Program. And with this experience fresh in mind, I deliberately sought out offices that would allow me to use those skills that I gained in my internship and in my prior research. So I chose to be a fellow in the National Institute on Aging, Office of Strategic Extramural Programs, in their small business office. So I served there from 2019 to December of 2020, helping manage the small business program there, which mostly focused on innovations related to Alzheimer's disease and conditions associated with aging. And I came over to the NHLBI at the tail end of my fellowship, and I've had a really, really valuable experience here working with all of the talented and creative people who we fund through small business grants and catalyzed grants. And I also have the pleasure of working with people who are much smarter than me on a daily basis. So it's an exciting job and it's always a learning experience.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. So as you can hear, a very diverse range of roles and experiences and a lot of expertise in helping access funding and advancing technology through commercialization. My first question is going to come over to Jon. Jon, could you give us just an overview of how you think about at Pinnacle Hill and from your experience, the breadth and the different types of follow-on funding that innovators could consider?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I mean, for me, I always first place I always start is what are the founders' objectives, and just what do they want to achieve? Where do they want to go? That's always step one. And I'm going to assume, for the sake of this conversation, that there's been a lot of technical due diligence already done around particular any projects. I'm just going to assume that's a given. It's high quality. I always think about the indication. The size of the treatable patient population. I see a lot of PIs and young companies put up, population sizes for a particular disease and or prevalence incidence, and that doesn't always translate to treatable patient population. I think about the level of unmet need for that indication. I always consider risk and how do you go about mitigating those risks and what does it cost? And I kind of package that together and then start to see if there's some alignment with any of the available funding options that we'll talk about today.
So thanks, Jon. So David, in your role at BARDA, you mentioned association with the BARDA's accelerator. Can you tell us a little bit more about not only the funding opportunities available through BARDA, but then also kind of the other supports that you all provide to innovators?
And that is absolutely key to what we're trying to achieve at BARDA. First off, BARDA is divided into both kind of program development, looking at developing things as well as actually delivering, because we are the ones responsible, for instance, for delivering over 1 billion COVID vaccines to the American public over the last 3 years. That's part of our responsibilities. But over on the program side, we have several divisions. Some of them, for instance, we have a device and diagnostics division. We have CBRN, which is the chemical, biological, nuclear, radiological division, looking at basically man-made threats. We have the influenza and emerging infectious disease division. And then we have DRIVE, the division I'm in. DRIVE is the division of research, innovation, and ventures. We really look at early stage innovations, basically from about proof of concept onward. And I would like to say we've thrown out the whole pipeline metaphor. I think of it as a highway, hence the name DRIVE. As an innovator, you're on-ramping onto this highway to make a journey to an exit. And that exit could be, taking the product to market, being acquired, licensing, etc. But you have a journey. We are there to support your journey. We are the information science. We are the guidance system. We are roadmap. And occasionally we are the fuel stop. So, and we're hoping to get you further down the line so that you are de-risked to the point where the venture capital is interested in supporting you, where big BARDA programs are interested in supporting you. So we really work with these early stages. And it's important to remember that over 80% of biomedical research or companies developing a product fail not because their product fails, but because they have business failures. So we focus a lot on helping you develop not only your product, but your business. And I would say that within DRIVE, we have 4 verticals of support. The first is the direct support. We have our Easy BAA, which, having spent a long time at NIH, I can't tell you how much easier our process is. You start by talking to our program manager for a particular area of interest we have. If if it sounds like you have something that fits that area, we ask you to go ahead and apply. You apply with a 2-page abstract, basically. We quickly look at that, determine if it really fits our needs, it's innovative, it addresses an unmet need, all that. And if so, then we'll ask you, okay, submit, a deeper proposal with your project plans, etc. And then we will negotiate with you to see if we can come to a conclusion about the collaboration. Start to finish, our target is 30 days. All right, for all of you applying for SBIRs, you know how insane that is. We have a couple limits, and I should say the fastest we've ever done was 9 days. All right, during the pandemic, when we really needed something, we could get it done in 9 days. Our cap is $750,000. There is some cost share with that, and it is a contract. It is not a grant. So there will be milestones, deliverables, etc. And we will work with you. I've been partnered with companies where we meet weekly to work on the experiments, to work on, IND submission, things like that. So we will really partner with you on that. So that's our first vertical. The second vertical is the accelerator network. 13 business accelerators across the country, where we support them to support you. And that can be everything from acceleration cohorts, boot camps, competitions, fast pitch, etc. MedTech Innovator is one of our partners in that. I'm sure you all know MedTech Innovator and the amazing programs they do. Plug and Play, as I mentioned before, First Flight. And we're coming up with our Accelerator 2.0 program now, which is expanding on the successes we had there and moving into also supporting development, evaluation, and testing. So it's going to be really, really exciting over this next year. Third vertical, as I mentioned, the Blue Knight program, where we collaborate with Johnson & Johnson, look at areas of interest to both of us, which, J&J being the largest biomedical company in the world, it's mostly, what are BARDA's interests? And then we support the residents that come into the program. We support their incubator space. So we will actually pay for laboratory and office space, shared common equipment, etc. We also provide educational programming. We've done CEO workshops because, let's face it, an awful lot of our startup companies, your MDs, PhDs, engineers, you may not even be able to spell CEO, much less be one. So we're there to, again, provide you with that education you need to know how to do that early startup company. And then we provide mentors. Both J&J and BARDA provide technical mentors and SMEs to help you with everything from, again, regulatory process, manufacturing, scaling. We helped somebody with web page design a couple months ago. So a whole kind of wraparound support for your company if you're in the Blue Knight program. And then our final vertical, very rare in the government, we have a venture fund. We partner with Global Health Investment Corporation on a global health security venture fund. I believe it currently is a $250 million fund. It will, within the next year or two, become $500 million. So we're talking almost real money here. And I believe at this point, we have invested in about 14 companies, I think. It changes, quickly. But so we actually have a venture fund in which we can actually do dilutive funding for startup companies. And it's mostly in that Series A, Series B round of funding. So that's what we've got. And I am posting in the chat my email. If you have more questions about anything BARDA related, you can come talk to me.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Stephanie, David alluded to SBIR, STTR as a source of funding. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely, Jim. So I do see several small business grantees in the audience. So for those of you, I'm preaching to the choir, but for everyone else, the Small Business Grant Program is it's an opportunity for federal agencies to provide grant and sometimes contract funding to small business concerns that are developing new technologies and conducting R&D activities that align with the mission of that agency. So as you could probably guess, with the National Institutes of Health, these grants are going to go to a lot of biotech, medical device, health tech startups that are developing new devices, therapeutics, diagnostics, research tools, etc., that can fulfill the mission of the NIH to advance medical research, extend quality of life and longevity, and reduce disease burden. So basically, a lot of the people who, if you're a small business and you are fewer than 500 employees, if you are based in the US, and if you fulfill the ownership requirements, because there are some pretty unique ownership requirements that the Small Business Administration requires companies to fulfill, you can apply for some of these grants that will support essentially the early stage de-risking and all the way up to some of the scale up and manufacturing activities that you need to make your product more attractive to potential private investors and strategic partners. So the small business program at the NIH consists of two main types of grants. There are the SBIR, or Small Business Innovation Research grants. These will go to small business concerns that are conducting research and developing new technologies with or without a nonprofit research institution as a partner. And there's a sister program called the STTR, or Small Business Technology Transfer Research Program. And this is very, very similar to the SBIR program. It's a little bit smaller just because we get fewer applicants and we give out fewer awards, but it's designed to facilitate collaborations between small business concerns and academic partners. So for instance, this is a very attractive option to academic researchers who want to keep their academic position, but they still want to dabble in entrepreneurial pursuits. Or it's also a great opportunity for translational researchers who maybe don't want to have a company of their own to partner with a small business concern that is, possibly going to be able to benefit from their research. But the goals of the small business program are very similar to Catalyze in that the end goal is not necessarily to advance scientific discovery. It's to develop a product that can be used to solve some sort of real world problem.
All right. Thanks, Stephanie. And Prabha, so we've, that $515 million that you mentioned that you've helped raise in the last number of years, that's a big number. Could you tell us a little bit more? We've heard about some of the government funded opportunities. Tell us more about kind of what innovators should know about trying to pursue venture capital or corporate investment as a follow-on.
Well, thank you. Yes, so raising 550 was, some part of it was also a public market. So that was only for my last company. There was previous companies that raised money for. So let's talk about venture capital investments. So firstly, of course, the story. We heard a little bit from Jon just now on packaging the story. Have a very convincing story and let the investors know what the risks are and how could you de-risk their investment. If you say there is no risk, no one's going to believe you. So talk about the risk, describe how you're going to de-risk the investment, and then also be honest about how long and at what cost will it take to take the convincing data you have to an inflection point. When is it going to reach the next value hurdle? And then also, is there a corporate partnership possibly in the works somewhere at that time? But be honest about it and say, what are the possibilities of that? Have a Gantt chart to show the value inflection points on the Gantt chart. And this shouldn't be like in the weeds, the Gantt chart. It should be high level, IND. Everyone knows what goes into an IND, that sort of thing. Just describe that and what are the dollar amounts, how long is it going to take? And be realistic about that. All the venture capitalists today are well educated in these matters. You can't fool them. Having a corporate investor is a good validation for you. And so we'll talk about how to attract them. So I'm firstly going to tell you some high level stuff like that, okay? The valuation which you ask for, you have to be realistic. I've had founders, who come back and say, they're worth like 60 million, 60 billion, all sorts of numbers. And they're picking off some products, which are already commercial for the value which they think their compound is going to compete in. But that is years away with lots of risk in between. So you've got to be very realistic with your valuation. And you have to be also very flexible with what investors propose. Don't be greedy. Just remember that as you grow, the pie gets bigger, and your founder, as the bite, will also get bigger because the pie is getting bigger. So having an angel investor or a corporate investor will be very good. And also, if you can add any of these people onto the board, not as an observer, but onto the board, it's very good. It helps you balance, the singular focus of venture investors. It is all about how much control can you and should you give up. Don't give up all controls, have some control. And so that's very, very important. You try to get some people on your side. Venture capitalists may look like they're on your side. They're not going to be on your side. Just take it from me. So you must have a good management team. Don't go without somebody who knows finance, somebody who knows the business side, how to find partnerships. Have a clinical person, a regulatory person with you. You've got to have a team of people, and the more people who've actually done it, hands-on experience, nothing beats that. That really helps win you over some venture capital. Now, going a little bit deeper into the thoughts. So when you look for venture capital, there are hundreds out there, right? So if you are, whatever area you're in diagnostics and CNS and cardiovascular and pharmaceuticals, in the diagnostics, wherever you are, check the websites of the investors to see, venture investors, to see if their fund even allows them to be in that space. Because much of that fund has been raised for certain things. You go proposing a cardiovascular to somebody who has no money in the cardiovascular space, you're wasting your time. So, just check that out. Also, you must remember what's the bandwagon today. Like today is the artificial intelligence bandwagon, aging, and cancer is always hot. So, there are these buzzwords. If you can say your technology can help in any one of these areas, but you have taken this one product to validate your technology, that's okay, but their eyes will be on this hot target which they're pursuing. And there's always something each year which is very sexy. Right now, AI is very sexy. So you should check their websites to see also, have they raised a recent fund? So sometimes you might get into a very late fund in which there's very little money left, but they'll put that money into you, and then come Series B, they have no more money. So you have to check to see if they have new funds they've raised, and go to those first. Those would be high priority. The new funds have many years, 10 years, and they'll be able to fund you to Series B, Series C, and so on, to as long as you reach your milestones. And then you have time to actually make your lead, whatever the product is, into a real product. You must remember that each fund has a fixed lifespan, and they'll want to show a 10 times advancement on what they have given you in 10 years or so. So you have to be really careful that you don't exceed by doing a lot of research and not progressing. So be really fast in progressing your product to come to those milestones. So if, one thing you have to be very careful is, if that venture capitalist has a product similar to yours, and be careful if you go to them, because they will, give your information to the other company. So be very careful. However, if you're well protected with your patents, and sometimes, these VCs are just like other investors. They want many shots on goal. They think this is a hot area. They'll invest in more than one company. So you should just check those out, but be careful about what you give them. So take all the VCs which I just mentioned to you about and put them into tiers, maybe groups of the first 10, the second 10, etc. But be very thick-skinned. You're going to get a lot of negative responses. Just be ready for it. Don't get hurt and all that. Thick-skinned is good. You need to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince. So just keep on going. Don't give up. So if the VC firm has made investments in your state, that's very good, because they like to have more than one person they can visit when they do visit. If they have no investments in your state, there's less likelihood that they will come to your state. So do check on that, or maybe set up your company in a state where you have a lot of VCs like Boston and so on, or New York, or even in San Francisco, etc. The story. So each VC has received, let's say 100 proposals a week. I mean, I'm not kidding you. They get a lot of proposals. So do not send long PowerPoints. It's definitely going to get on the delete folder. Don't give huge business plans. Very brief. Communicating that value proposition, the headlines of it in a summary is essential. And there should be no BS in that entire thing. No details of science. And the science may be fantastic for you, but they really don't have time for this. That's not what they're investing in. In your PowerPoint, the message has to be on the first page. If you lost them on your first page, you're not going to get the 30 other pages. Just forget it. The first page has to tell them they've got to read on. So the message has to be on the first page as the value proposition. Very close up to that, the management experience. So maybe the first page will carry that. And the need for your product. Is the market there hungry for your product? Is the corporation hungry for your product? Competition. And, a lot of people say, oh, I have this fantastic target and I've got this lead molecule against the target. Well, it's going to hit the same disease. The patient really doesn't care if you have a fantastic target and a great science. It's curing the same disease. Is it going to be better for that patient? How is it going to be better? That's how you have to differentiate, not based on the target. Picture yourself as the patient. Would I take this if this is 10 times more expensive or even twice as expensive? And I'll go for the cheapest product that's going to do the same thing. And have, the adverse events, for instance, maybe, some sort of formulation advantage, maybe once a day versus once, every day for 7 days. Also indicate potential pharma who are also working in a similar space, if not closely related. And so there could be potential pharma interest. And the details can be presented later, but even the first meeting cannot be too detailed because you're going to lose interest. And remember, you need one good lead investor. If you get your lead investor lined up, they will bring the other people who are either sitting on the fence or thinking about it, or their friends. So all you need is one lead investor, even though you might think you might need 3 or 4, they will help you bring the others. Especially if you have a corporate investor, they might actually know some others too. Now, talking about corporate investors, remember, they will never be a lead. They will be one of the investors and they will validate your technology. And the corporation may just want to partner or invest in your product or technology. And that's great because it's non-diluting dollars. Bring it in and VCs will like it. It again validates your technology. This is especially true for the Japanese and Chinese. They will not come on as venture investors. They will invest in your product and your technology. And they may have some rights. You have to be careful about that because if you give away, much of the rights in the US or Europe, you might lose some interest from venture capital. So you can give away rights in Japan and China. That's okay. You're never going to go to those markets anyway. You just cannot do so. So the other thing is to see if the companies, the funds, certain companies have certain funds, like J&J has a fund, Lilly has a fund, Merck has a fund. They have these investment funds. They usually invest in areas of their business units, their interests. If they're working in vaccines, they might invest in vaccines. Working in cancer, they might invest. Many of the big areas like CNS and aging and stuff, a lot of them are in there. And many areas apply, the basic technology may apply to others. And they may want to take the technology in-house to use for one of their own products or business areas.
Prabha, I'm going to jump in for just a minute and remind our audience that please feel free to drop questions for our panelists into the chat here so that once we move through this question, we can potentially get some questions from you to ask our panelists.
Yeah, we'll finish off quickly then. So importantly, you should see if you have a champion. Have a champion in the companies you're going to. That helps a lot. Somebody who's known you, trusts you, that helps a whole lot. And same thing with venture capitalists. If you have friends who've been to that venture capitalist, them placing a call on your behalf helps you a lot. Just remember that Chinese and Japanese companies do invest, and not to forget them. And now recently, even Indian companies have been investing. So with that, I'll close, Jim, and wait for the questions.
Okay, thank you. We've heard a lot of different options for follow-on funding from government, corporate, venture capital. John, I'll come back to you since you kind of kicked us off here. If you're coaching or advising an innovator who is trying to figure out which of these many potential pathways to pursue, should I go after a grant funding? Should I go after, a contract or a venture investment? What are some of the ways that questions you might ask them to help them discern what the next right step is for them?
Yeah, I think involvement in the company, control. I think probably you mentioned control. You go down the institutional investment route, you're going to lose control really, really quickly. Timelines. Do you want to get this product on the market? Does time matter to you? And in some places, it matters more than others. So I think that is a really important component to consider when you're thinking about, which avenue to go. I think a lot of people have talked about, the institutional investment and corporate investment. I think some of the government funding options, sorry, David, sorry, Stephanie, they're painfully slow. So if time matters, that's really going to have an impact on whether I would say, hey, you might not want to think about that. Beauty of that, though, is non-diluted funding, which is kind of nice. Those are some of the questions that I typically ask people. I think it's important, as Prabha alluded to make them aware of pros and cons of each one of those: the institutional investment, the corporate investment, incubators, the accelerators, and David is the expert there. Government funding, I think there's Stephanie and others are experts there. I agree. Can't remember who said this, but I would ask them, you want to retain equity, time doesn't matter. You just want to retain equity the whole way. Then that might direct them down a particular path versus going down an institutional investment path. So those are the types of questions that I typically ask. And I tend to work more with faculty at academic institutions, in particular UNC Chapel Hill, to try to talk with them through, what path they want to take and what some of the options might be. Inevitably, I think that in itself will give you guidance as to, where you want to kind of help them, explore whether that's a viable option or not. And I thought Prabha did a great job of outlining some of the avenues to things to do to actually gain a better understanding of what these groups are looking for, and importantly, what they're not looking for.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, great, John. Great advice. That'll transition to maybe the last question that I have, since we're running up on time here. Is I'd like to ask each of you to provide, the question would be, what advice would you give to people in the audience as they're considering follow-on funding opportunities, or even just kind of considering, based on your experience, transitioning their technology, advancing it towards the market? And we'll start, since you got the last question, we'll start with David, and then we'll come back around in the same order, and we'll end with you again, John. So David, up first.
Sure. And Prabha hit on some really important points about the investors and understanding them. And that comes down to one of my my 3 key points. One, know your audience. All right. When you're writing to investors, you need to write one way. When you're writing SBIR, you need to write another way. So know your audience. And when it comes down to SBIRs, especially NIH, there's no better way to learn your audience than go volunteer to be on a study section. I can tell you, having spent 10 years of stressfully trying to find reviewers every single round, they're desperate for reviewers. You've got experience, in small business, and you've got experience in, whichever area of, whether it's vaccines, therapeutics, etc. Go to the CSR web page, pull up the meetings, look up the SRO for it, volunteer. And as a volunteer, they stupidly give you $250 for the day of, that you're there, which is kind of insulting, in my opinion. They haven't raised that for 20 years, but you get so much out of it. You will read lots and lots of grants. You will learn what works, what doesn't work. So that's my first thing. Get in there, and plus you meet all these people on these goodies. You will learn your audience. Absolutely most important thing. Second thing is, whether it's on your pitch deck or in your SBIR grant, don't BS them. You need to be truthful, and you need to, very simply, tell them what the product is up front. I can't tell you how many grants I've read, and I mean, I've read thousands. I come to the end and I'm not sure what the product is. You can't just tell me this is the most innovative, life-changing, that will change how we view patient, X-ray. No, tell me you've got a new X-ray reader. It's keep it simple, and use spell check. Because I know reviewers who, after like the third or fourth, spelling error, they're just like, "Thanks for not wasting any more of my time. If you can't bother to, So those are the two biggest ones to me: is know your audience and communicate directly to them what your product is. So those are my two biggies.
Great advice. Stephanie.
Yeah, so David, I cannot agree any more with your suggestion to volunteer as reviewers. Peer review is such a valuable process, and the thing is that it can't happen without people volunteering their time and expertise. And that's I have talked to many small business grantees and applicants who've asked about serving as reviewers, and I'll tell them it's a lot of work, but it's really valuable. And for those people in the audience who've successfully gotten Catalyze funding, there are a lot of intricacies about the grant application process that you're already familiar with, thanks to going through the Catalyze grant application process. The key thing I would recommend for everyone is make sure you reach out to me or one of my other fellow program staff at the NHLBI Innovation Commercialization Office at least a month before the deadline, if you can. We tend to get very busy in the month before the deadlines, as you can imagine. So you're going to get most of our time if you plan ahead. And there are some different administrative requirements that you have to have in place for small business grants compared to Catalyze, because there's no other way to put it. Small business grants, since a lot of the policies governing them are controlled by the Small Business Administration, they have some very unusual rules. So for example, instead of your budget being in terms of direct costs, it's in terms of total costs, and there are subcontracting requirements. And it's important to talk to us so we can just kind of clue you in on the differences between the two mechanisms. Also, another piece of advice, and this goes for both Catalyze grants and non-small business grants and small business grants, but make sure you read the application instructions. There are a lot of really great resources that I send to all of my applicants, and the SF424, I call it the application Bible. Keep it on hand. Be sure to utilize the search function, because all of the instructions are in there. And especially if you've been working really hard on a proposal, the last thing that I want to see is a quality proposal getting kicked back because it was non-compliant or it included unallowable attachments. So that would be my major piece of advice, is that if you're interested, be sure to reach out to us early. We are very, very happy to help you. We want to see you succeed. And so I'm going to drop my email in the chat in case anyone has any questions about applying for small business.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. And Prabha.
So I'll keep it short because I think we may be running out of time. So one point is, let's say you need $30 million. Let's say 25. Let's make it a number which is hard to divide the two. $25 million. And it's hard for someone in the VC world to take that plunge and be a lead investor. So I always work on fear and greed. There are two things which venture capital, they're very fearful they're going to lose the money, but they're greedy. They don't want to be the other person who makes the money, right? So they want to be that. So you work on fear and greed. And to do that, you split up what your need is into two tranches. So you have your first tranche, let's say you give it at $1. And see the second tranche for those who will come in on having reached your milestone. So you get your milestone that you will get the rest of the money for $1. If they reject that, of course, when they come back for the second tranche, if they don't come into the first tranche, they may have to pay $3 for that same one, you see. So they will, since it's easy to put money into somebody who's successful, if you reached your milestone, they'll put the rest of the money. So the first chunk of change they lose will not be a huge amount, but you at least can get the show on the road, set up your facility, get your show on the road. And that usually entices people to get in, even in difficult times.
Great advice. All right, John, bring us home here.
All right. So I'll keep it short and sweet. 3 things. One is network, network, network. Embrace the feedback. Embrace the feedback, the criticism. That's how you get better and better and better. Understand your risks and how to mitigate those, because those, I think, every investor will focus on what are the risks, how are we going to mitigate it, what's it going to cost to mitigate it, and when are we going to mitigate it? I'll stop there.
Excellent. All right. Join me in thanking our fantastic panel here for the wealth of information that they've provided. As many of them mentioned, please feel free to reach out to Marissa or follow up with them directly if you want to have follow-up conversations or ask specific questions based on their individual areas of expertise. It's been a pleasure talking with all of you, and I'm honored to have been part of this great day. With that, Marissa, I'll kick it back to you.